In X-Men Annual number 11, Captain Britain said he hoped that he and Meghan would find a place and purpose of their own one day. Were they the thoughts of Brian Braddock or his co-creator Chris Claremont? Whichever it was, in 1987, that wish would finally come true. No one could say that Marvel hadn't persevered with Captain Britain. From his 1976 debut, he had been given his own series, a co-starring slot with the company's biggest star, and been sent on a Tolkien-esque adventure with the Black Knight. When none of those approaches seemed to work, it was out with the red costume and in with, well, lots really. A brand new costume, a new physique, powers, even a new location, where he battled more outlandish and more dangerous foes than ever before. This new approach to the character gained traction, enough to get him his own series again, one that was available on both sides of the Atlantic. But alas, despite his super strength, the character just couldn't carry his own book. And, as had happened several times before, his comic was axed. The last issue carrying an editorial that provided a slight glimmer of hope for his fans. So was it over, or wasn't it? That editorial farewell was interesting. It said that Chris Claremont was planning to include Cap in the following year's X-Men Annual. Well, he did. It also said that Jim Shooter was considering launching Captain Britain as a standard Marvel title. That didn't happen. So those plans that Chris Claremont had were all that we could cling on to. But they weren't his only plans. He had been mulling over what to do with those X-Men that weren't going to feature in the Fall of the Mutants. He knew that if he didn't use them, someone else would. Alan Davis was someone that he had had various discussions with in the past about a collaboration. He had even asked Davis to be the regular X-Men artist. And although he did pencil a couple of issues along with those annuals, he wasn't keen on signing up long term. He felt that on a successful book like that, you were too constrained by its established formula. Also, unless you did something truly spectacular, you were only ever going to be just another X-Men artist in a very long line. He would prefer to work on something original, where he could have an input in its creation. So it was fortunate that one day Alan took a call from the writer that was of a different nature. Instead of asking him once more to work on the X-Men, Chris told him that there was going to be a new title linked to the mutants. It was going to be set in England and was going to feature Captain Britain. Was that enough to persuade the man who redefined Captain Britain to finally team up long-term with the character's original writer? At the end of 1987, mere weeks after the Fall of the Mutants came to an end, we got an answer. And it was a thing of beauty. I bought this when it came out, and I'd never seen anything like it before. No adverts, square bound, glossy paper. It was a real statement of confidence from Marvel in the creators. Then I opened it, saw the art, read the story. I tell you what, let me show you. Our story opens on Muir Isle with Kitty Pryde. She is struggling to sleep, distraught after seeing her teammates apparently killed in battle. Okay. Well, that didn't take long, did it? So, she was caught up along with the rest of the X-Men in the mutant massacre. It was during the savage battle with the Marauders that Kitty saved the life of Rogue by phasing her as Harpoon was about to finish her off. Unfortunately for her, Harpoon still somehow hit her. This had the unexpected effect of keeping her in her ghost-like form, no matter how hard she tried to solidify. Worse than that, her molecules were slowly drifting apart. The process seemed to be irreversible, and eventually she would cease to exist. The X-Men turned to Mr. Fantastic for a solution, just as he was suffering a badly timed crisis of confidence. But he overcame this in time to stop the process. Kitty still needed time to recover though, and it was whilst doing so on Muir Isle that she watched on as her teammates seemingly made the ultimate sacrifice to save the world. And now she lays there in emotional agony, an agony that soon spills over into her dreams. a particularly painful dream in which she is reunited with her teammates. Kind of. I mean, they're on a film set and they don't seem to have any powers until the director, Professor X, calls action. At which point Kitty is told to hurry along. After all, she doesn't want to be left behind. But of course, she was. While she lays amongst the wreckage of the set, somebody tells her that dreams can sometimes be windows onto other realities. It's Rachel. Yeah, Rachel. Oh, right, yeah. Okay. Some time ago, she had set out to kill Selene, the Black Queen of the Hellfire Club. Wolverine tried to talk her out of it, saying that she was an X-Man and X-Men didn't murder. But in a truly great cliffhanger, Rachel told him that if he wanted to stop her, he would have to kill her. Snicked. That was no fake out either. Wolverine did stab her, albeit off panel, and Rachel spent the best part of the next couple of issues on the run, trying to keep herself alive and avoiding her teammates. The latter task was made easier by the fact that they had their hands full with the Uber Sentinel Nimrod. It was whilst wrestling with her conscience that she was tempted into a wondrous other world by a woman who promised her a better, happier life. It was only at the end of the issue, as Rachel finally took the plunge into this other world, that we are told that the woman was, in fact, Spiral, and that the other world was Mojo World. And that is where she has remained ever since. Now, on the letters page of Uncanny X-Men issue 208, that's the issue before Rachel headed off to Mojo World, it was announced that she would be starring in a Phoenix limited series, written by Chris Claremont. That series would have showed us exactly what happened on Mojo World. It was planned, but never released. So the details of that chapter of Rachel's life remain a mystery. Professor X isn't happy to see her. He says when her teammates needed her the most, she ran out on them. What would the mutant massacre have been like if Phoenix had been there? Suddenly, chains appear, and her colleagues use these to keep her from leaving. Kitty hates this. She says it should be Rachel's choice whether she stays or leaves, and she uses her phasing power to help Rachel break free. Her teammates are very displeased with this, but then we see they aren't her teammates at all, and the Warwolves make their debut. It was all a dream, of course, not that that's much comfort. She's still alone, her teammates still dead, but there was something else about that dream. Why was Phoenix there? What does it mean? We leave the former X-Men for the time being and instead catch up with Megan. She is in her element, surrounded by the raw, natural, innocent beauty of nature. Her feelings of joy don't last long though, as returning to the lighthouse that she shares with Brian, she finds it in a mess. Broken furniture, photos of him and his twin sister Betsy Braddock strewn across the floor. It's only when she sees the news bulletin that everything falls into place. Brian seems to be drowning his sorrows. Not that it's working. He blames himself for not protecting his sister. Says, what's the point in having all these powers if you're not there to use them when they're needed the most? Megan tries to reassure him, tells him that he's not to blame. But this is Brian at his worst. And driven by his anger, he sends his Captain Britain mask flying and Megan fleeing from the room. She then begins talking like a domestic abuse victim, blaming herself for his actions. We see how devoted she is to him. And pulling herself together, she realises that it's the pain that made him lash out. She doesn't know what to do, so she leaves the lighthouse to go and get some advice from a good friend. Meanwhile, back on Muir Isle, we reunite with Nightcrawler, who's having the time of his life taking on half a dozen automated musketeer opponents. Nightcrawler. Boy. He had it worst of all in the build-up to this issue. He was involved in the battle against Nimrod, and it was there that he tried to teleport away with a piece of the killer robot. However, Nimrod was one of those antagonists who learns from every battle, and Kurt had used this tactic on him before. The Sentinel initiated countermeasures, and as Nightcrawler tried to teleport away, he screamed in agony, and did indeed vanish. But did he teleport, or was he disintegrated? He is eventually located by Cerebro, and when his teammates find him in a very bad condition, he tells them he is no longer able to teleport. He recovers a bit by the next issue, but not enough, as he finds himself in the midst of the mutant massacre. He teleports, weakening himself further, just before Riptide puts him in a coma. That is where he stays for over a year, our time, until coming out of it in time to hear the news about his teammates. Originally, Colossus was going to be on the team too, but it was decided that in Captain Britain they already had their big, strong character. And although Rogue does have super strength, she doesn't really fill that archetype. So the plan changed. I guess that's why Colossus seemed to recover so quickly, in time to join his colleagues before they battled the adversary. Nightcrawler hasn't fully recovered yet though. He gets lax, overconfident. And when one of the robots catches him with its sword, he instinctively teleports. Something he still isn't really up to. And it's Kitty's appearance, initially seeming to make things worse, that actually prevents him from coming to further harm. She is furious with him, asks him if he's trying to join their teammates. And then, as they step outside, oh wow, look at that art. It's so glorious. Isn't it glorious? Anyway, stepping outside, Kurt explains that when he first awoke from his coma, he wanted to share the joy of still being alive with his teammates. Only he couldn't. He then goes on to tell Kitty about a dream he had, a very familiar dream to her. If they both had the same dream, maybe it wasn't a dream after all. Maybe Rachel is trying to send them a message. Whichever it is, once they get back to Moira McTaggart's house, there is a knock at the door, and trouble has come to visit. It's Gatecrasher, followed soon after by Megan, who's there for that advice that she was looking for. Kitty knows Megan, but she doesn't know Gatecrasher. Nightcrawler doesn't know any of them, including Captain Britain. Predictably, Megan is unhappy at seeing the Technet's leader there. She, along with the two X-Men, wants to know why she is there. And this is explained when she activates a Psychcom crystal containing a pre-recorded message from Saturnine. And this is arguably the point where the mainstream Marvel Universe became Earth 616. Sure, Captain Britain had teamed up with the likes of Spider-Man, Captain America in the past. Psylocke had joined the X-Men. Cap even featured in the Contest of Champions. And I mean properly featured, not just cameoed like Jack of Hearts or Black Goliath. But all of those appearances felt like novelties, as though as soon as the character had served its purpose, it could just be put back in its box. But now, those two continuities, those two realities, had collided, had interweaved. Captain Britain's enemies, the Lighthouse, Saturnine, they were all out of the bottle, and there was no way they were going back. Saturnine explains that she has sent the Technet to apprehend Phoenix, who she considers a threat to reality. Kitty tries to stick up for her friend, saying that she is an X-Man, and as such, nobody's taking her anywhere. But Gatecrasher merely ups the ante by summoning the rest of the Technet. Naturally, our heroes try to fight their way out of the situation, but they don't get very far. Kitty is quickly put out of action by the entity once known as Fascination, now known as Scatterbrain, and Megan, before she's able to do anything, is swallowed up by Bodybag. Kurt, as is usually the case, proves to be slightly more difficult to keep hold of. But for the Technet, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I suppose we should address the issue of Rachel, shouldn't we? Stuck in that dream world. Well, she isn't stuck there much longer, as she finds herself bursting from the reality of Mojo world into something seemingly even crazier. Of course, we don't know why she suddenly burst from that reality, If only we'd got that limited series. Her new surroundings aren't as entirely bizarre as they seem, because she is actually on our Earth, well, Earth 616 anyway, and the people around her are attending a gala fancy dress ball. And even that background is just a backdrop. In fact, it's the same backdrop that features on the cover of this comic book. The only inaccuracy really being the fact that none of the rest of Excalibur, nor any members of the Technet, set foot here. Before you know it, the Warwolves, working for Mojo himself, also burst into our reality. Rachel, normally perfectly capable of defending herself, discovers that the Warwolves are immune to her telekinesis. Never mind, she can always use it on them indirectly. Throwing one of the Warwolves through a wall, Rachel then discovers that she is in fact back on Earth. But not just on Earth, but in London, of all places. Unfortunately for her, fleeing into the streets doesn't shake the Warwolves off, and they follow her onto the London Underground. When she gets on to a London Underground train, one of the Warwolves even manages to get on it with her, kind of, before she then forcibly removes him via some awesome artwork. And with that, for now, she is free. So what about Nightcrawler? Where did he go? Well, he went to a certain lighthouse where he found a certain washed-up superhero. Washed up? He may soon be. Because Captain Britain, found by Kurt in a drunken stupor, is thrown by him into the metaphorical drink, the effects of which are instantly sobering. Brian actually thinks he's being attacked before he sees and recognises Nightcrawler, even if Nightcrawler isn't so familiar with him. Kurt then tries to talk some sense to him. He explains what happened to Kitty and Megan, says he needs the captain's help. But Brian is despondent. What's the point in saving them now, just for them to sacrifice themselves further down the line, like his sister did, like the rest of the X-Men did? He says they are heroes, but heroes don't really ever achieve anything, don't change things, never really make things better. But Kurt says he's never really considered himself a hero, and he considers Brian even less so. He says it isn't fair that his teammates died, and he was left alive to grieve for them, because the pain is more than he can endure. But he is alive, and he has to honour their memory. Brian says you don't understand. You don't know what it's like to actually die. And Kurt says perhaps not. But does Brian know what it means to truly live? Alone and in a strange city, Rachel is walking the streets of London. And no, they aren't always foggy. Alan Davis should know better than that. She's looking in the window of a shop when she sees a reflection she would probably rather not. And before you know it, Bodybag has his third meal of the day. But things don't usually go smoothly for the Technet, and today is no different. Because if you remember rightly, they aren't the only ones who want Rachel. The Warwolves, oh yeah, they're desperate to get their paws on Rachel. And the ensuing battle between them and the Technet shows how determined both teams are to keep hold of that prize. But I wasn't referring to them. I was referring to Nightcrawler, who used a portable Cerebro to track down his colleagues. Nightcrawler is a great tactician. He knows that Bodybag has to be his primary target. He wants to get his colleagues free, and with a little assist from a Warwolf, that's precisely what he manages to do. They aren't exactly battle ready yet though, leaving Kurt at a distinct disadvantage. However, just as Gatecrasher is about to pound him into the pavement, that earlier speech he gave to Brian has borne fruit. But despite saving Kurt's skin, the battle still isn't going well for our heroes. Rachel is held bound by ring toss. Kitty made very solid by Joy Boy. And Megan, thanks to Waxworks, well, she's not exactly solid. Nightcrawler knows what the issue is. They, out of all three factions, aren't operating as a team. Something that changes as soon as he manages to free Rachel. And indeed, our heroes using their powers against the Technet, and the Technet using their powers against the Warwolves and themselves, turns the tide of battle. with Kitty's left hook on a shrunken gatecrasher being the highlight. The Technet may be clowns, but they're no fools, and they quickly leave the scene. Swiftly followed, painfully followed by the Warwolves. Our heroes have won the day. Megan shows how blinded by love she is by claiming that it was Captain Britain who saved them all. And our 3 former X-Men get a long overdue reunion. And there you have it. Good has triumphed over evil. Brian will go and track down the Warwolves at some point, deal with them. But other than that, they can all now go their separate ways. Really? Later that day, as they all sit around a campfire, Rachel evokes that classic X-Men metaphor. She says, what about the dream? Professor X's dream of a world where all Earth's children, mutant and otherwise, live together in peace and harmony. The X-Men have gone. But does that mean that the dream has to die too? Are they supposed to give up on it? Kurt suggests that no one can replace the X-Men. And Rachel agrees. But, she says, King Arthur had a dream too. What? He dreamed of a world where might served right, instead of subjugating it. And his sword, Excalibur, was a symbol of that. That sword, the image of it, is a means of keeping the legend alive and vital through the ages. If you say so. Excalibur was light in the darkness of fear and ignorance and hate. If the X-Men died for that kind of dream, is it too much to ask that they fight together to preserve it? Kurt and Megan are quickly on board. And then, after minimal persuasion, Shadowcat and Captain Britain join them. And thus, with all 5 of them signed up to the dream, Excalibur, that ancient blade that represents light and hope, is once more drawn. Metaphorically speaking. What a debut. I've reread that issue so many times and it never gets boring. Now here is another example of me being a bit thick as a child. Because the next time I saw Excalibur, it was in this. Issue 2. It had the same team members and it had the Warwolves. I snapped it up, read it and thought how cool it was that I had the first 2 issues of this great new series. The thing is, I didn't. As previously stated, the Excalibur Special Edition was released in December of 1987. Issue 2 was released in November of 88. That's a hell of a gap between issues. Probably because this came out in October of 88. So this is the real issue 1 of the ongoing Excalibur series. I can't remember the timeline clearly now, but I do recall buying the special edition from a specialty comic book store, pretty much the only comic book store in the southeast of England at that point, and I can only assume it was a few months after December of 87, so the gap between issues wasn't as noticeable. In this issue, we are reunited with some old friends, as well as seeing some purely Excalibur elements making their debut. We begin by seeing a face familiar to any die-hard Captain Britain fan, Tweedledope of the Crazy Gang. Somehow, he is bringing the spark of life to a robotic head who can, we will discover, create portals to other worlds. Speaking of other worlds, what is going on in the lighthouse's basement? Interesting to see that Megan still watches Wild Ways, despite what happened in the New Mutants annual. Di Thomas shows up as the Warwolves' return causes havoc. And we see Courtney Ross for the first time in ages, since those Marvel team-ups in fact. In issue 2, we see a bit more of Widget, the robotic head, this time helping a young lad escape the clutches of the Vixen's men, and the Warwolves are eventually rounded up and incarcerated in an unconventional way. 3 issues in, and Excalibur's individual identity is well and truly established. The main thing that people remember about the series is its quirky sense of humour, and we have that here in the absurdity of the villains and their in-team banter. Of course, this is in large part down to Chris Claremont's writing, but Alan Davis has always enjoyed including comedic elements in his work, and it's the combination of these two that really defined the comic. In fact, in Marvel Age Annual number 4, yeah, Marvel Age had annuals. Weird, huh? The series was described by Chris Claremont himself as a cosmic comedy caper, a phrase that editor Anna Senti had also used. As for the team, they're getting along fine at the moment. We've seen their individual personalities, but not much more than that. Although Nightcrawler and Megan may be getting a little too close, something we see more of in issue 3. Over the next few issues, we see the team move into Brian's lighthouse, the Juggernaut, the Crazy Gang, Arcade. We also see the kind of characterisation that we would expect from Chris Claremont. Brian being a bit too concerned about Courtney and not concerned enough about Megan, something that only feeds her insecurities. Plus, there's an interdimensional swap of our Moira McTaggart and Callisto, and Nazis. Issues 6 and 7 are interesting. They carried the Inferno logo on them. Not just the Inferno Continues tag that was in the corner of a lot of covers at that time, of comics that were just tie-ins to that event, but Inferno writ large across the top. But their necessity, their importance in that event is pretty much non-existent, which is particularly odd when you consider that Rachel's kind of brother was central to that event. Issue 8, and wait a minute, that's not Alan Davis's work. The same is true of the contents too, as Ron Lim takes over on pencils. The good news is his style doesn't jar too much with Davis's, so it doesn't distract from ongoing events. Those events are that the team are still in New York, but something seems to be up with Brian's powers. Then we get to issue 9 and a cracking little two-parter. One that I think is the epitome of early Excalibur. Alan Davis is back, and of course Chris is our writer. I've got to start by saying how good it is to see Alan Davis drawing Brian Braddock in the original Captain Britain uniform, even if it doesn't fit too well. I know a lot of people don't like it, including Alan Davis, but I've always loved that red suit. This tale begins with Lockheed, alone in the lighthouse. He's alone because the Excalibur team are still in America, although it seems that Kitty Pryde herself is there to surprise him, but not in the way he would want. And if it seems that the nature of this surprise is very out of character for Kitty, that's because this isn't our Kitty Pryde. This is Lightning Force, an alternate Excalibur from another dimension. Now, Captain Britain's history is littered with alternate versions of him, due in large part to the character's connections with the multiverse. In the past, we had seen the fascist, although not German, Captain Briton, that's Captain spelt with a K, and we would go on to see the merciless Albion, both of which were alternate Brian Braddocks. And so this Hauptmann England is just another example of the seemingly limitless evil Brians. He, though, has taken his evil to the next level by incorporating the Nazi swastika in his uniform. Plus, of course, he isn't alone. The whole team, barring Rachel, have been given Third Reich analogues. But we're going to leave them for now and travel instead to the United States of America. Actually, we're going to Westchester. To be even more precise, to Charles Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, where in a room that looks like the Danger Room, but we are told isn't, Kitty Pryde is putting Brian Braddock through the ringer in an effort to discover the extent to which he has lost his powers. He is still super strong, but nowhere near as super strong as he was. It's not just his strength that's being tested. His reflexes, his ability to fly are also being tested. It's fair to say he doesn't pass the tests. But that's not all, because it seems that Megan's powers are affected too, as both Kurt and Kitty have now noticed. Without even being aware of it, she uses her shape-changing ability to mirror those close by her. And when this happens to Phoenix, the effects are far more spectacular. This is the beginning of the team discovering that Captain Britain's powers, and Megan's but to a lesser degree, are linked to the UK, something that is more finely tuned by Alan Davis further down the line. The sooner they get the pair of them back to the UK, the better. And then a well-timed call from Scotland Yard gives them reason to do just that. Meanwhile, in the Tower of London, a beefeater is showing a family around the Hall of Heroes, where replicas of great British superheroes can be found. There isn't just the original Captain Britain suit, but also Union Jack, and even Spitfire is mentioned, although we don't see her, both of which characters will have further associations with Captain Britain in years to come. Union Jack in the fascinating Knights of Pendragon series, and Spitfire as a member of MI13. What the Beefeater and family don't realise is that one of the doorways they walk through is unlike any other doorway they have experienced. It's only when we see who that family has been replaced with that we too realise the nature of that door. But this is a busy evening in the Tower of London because there are other unexpected visitors there too. Knowing that the alternate versions of Moira MacTaggart and Callisto are being held at the Tower, Lightning Force have rendezvoused there, with the intention of liberating their countrywomen. And there's something about that Kitty Pryde, certainly not the spunky character that we're used to. That's definitely confirmed when we see her attack one of Moira MacTaggart's guards, looking every inch the ghoul. Then the Brigadier, also guarding Moira MacTaggart, is easily disarmed and subdued by Callisto. But that's not all. As Di Thomas is investigating the new prehistoric family, he discovers that the man with him isn't Brian Braddock, something that becomes abundantly clear when the doppelganger gets set to pound him through the wall. Something that the real Brian would love to have done years ago, I'm sure. Kitty, the real Kitty, saves his skin, whilst outside the rest of the team land in the courtyard, although Nightcrawler advises Brian and Megan to stay back, worried that they will be more at risk in their current weakened states. Although maybe Brian isn't quite as weak as he was. Phoenix is there too, of course, keeping the evil captain under control. And, oh man, she looks so good in these issues. And then we get a really interesting encounter, as Kitty, our Kitty, meets her doppelganger, a person who differs from her in more ways than just a costume. The encounter doesn't last long, although this other Kitty does seem to show more compassion than the rest of her Lightning Force colleagues. Hauptmann England makes the most of that distraction to punch Phoenix half a mile away. And seeing the departing Phoenix, it's clear to Brian and Megan that they have to get involved, even though Brian doesn't even have a costume. Speaking of costumes, Hauptmann England now finally reveals his, just in time to battle with Nightcrawler. Strength versus agility. And it seems that agility is going to win the day, until we are reminded that there isn't just one Nightcrawler. The Lightning Force's version using Nightcrawler's own weapon against him. And so it seems that the Lightning Force's mission has been a success. Their versions of Callisto and Moira MacTaggart have been freed, the Brigadier and Kurt have been taken hostage, and now no one is left to stand in their way. Well, maybe one person, because our own weakened version of Captain Britain has arrived. If only he hadn't grown so much since he last wore that red outfit. It seems the odds are against our heroes, but isn't that just the way we like it? Now, wouldn't it be great to see Alan Davis illustrating a toe-to-toe battle between the two captains? But as can be seen from the cover of issue 10, that doesn't happen, as Alan misses another issue. Instead, Marshall Rogers is on the pencils, with Paul Neary replaced by Terry Austin on the inks. Glynis Wein, Oliver, is still doing the colours though, although as you'll see, they aren't quite as spectacular as we've seen in other issues. So, we have a big showdown at the Tower of London. Not the first time for Captain Britain, although the last time was beside a captain, Captain America, a man who had actually fought against Nazis during the Second World War. Now, in the late 1980s, it's Captain Britain's turn. But it isn't going well for him. Remember, our captain is in a weakened state. Not that Hauptmann England knows that. He just assumes the fight is easy because he is superior. Those issues that were raised in Professor X's mansion now really come to the fore. Not just the lack of strength, but also agility. This is embarrassing. There are times in this issue when Marshall Rogers has a fair stab at emulating Alan Davis's style, such as on the back cover, for example. But other times, Oh my word. By the way, that was the Brigadier trying to escape from the alternate Moira and Callisto, and failing, of course. As for Captain Britain, things aren't improving for him, as he takes an involuntary dip in the River Thames. Hauptmann England thinks that this could be the end of the battle, but it seems that Cap has recovered some strength after all. That's the spirit, Cap. That's what got us through the Blitz. Well, not me, obviously. Wow, it seems returning to the UK really has revitalised him. But unfortunately, the battle isn't yet over. And after he's briefly diverted to save the little dinosaur boy from some falling masonry, Shadowcat, the Shadowcat of Lightning Force's reality, uses her phasing powers. Our Kitty Pryde disrupts electricity when she passes through machines. This Kitty Pryde disrupts the electricity of life, as Cap has now found out to his cost. And just to make sure, Lightning Force's Nightcrawler takes him on a quick, unwanted trip. Safe landings, Cap. So some great, effective teamwork has done for Captain Britain. All that is left is for Hauptmann England to finish the job. But that ain't the way our story ends. Nightcrawler can't believe it. He says Cap should have been barely conscious, utterly helpless. Well, maybe he was. No, that doesn't make sense. Have you been wondering where Megan is? Well, she was there all along, hiding in plain sight, courtesy of a costume change. Oh, that was unfortunate. Actually, Megan really cleans up. Not only does she deal with Kurt, but she also takes care of the Nazi Moira and Callisto. Stupidly easily, in fact. Maybe Lightning Force's Shadowcat will cause Megan problems. Not to worry, Rachel's got it covered. So of course the heroes are triumphant and the villains are rounded up. A little bit later, the two Shadowcats meet. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this before, but there is something on the forehead of Lightning Force's Shadowcat. It's a tattoo perhaps, but it is the Star of David, because both Kitties, are Jewish. So what would that mean for a Jewish person to serve in the Third Reich's Lightning Force? This is why she looked so haunted before. Our Kitty thinks, like her, she must be barely 15, but she looks so much older. Lightning Force's Kitty says that it's because she has seen death. Not only seen it, but caused it. Presumably not by choice, but by obligation to the Reich. Kitty is outraged by this. After all, she's looking at herself under a different regime. Moira McTaggart makes a suitably distasteful comment, saying that Kitty's abilities have marked her out as someone that can serve the fatherland. And that is an honour for her and her mongrel race. Kitty says they made her a demon. Moira says, in her eyes, they already are. And it's Rachel who takes Kitty and the heat out of the situation. And then the two of them have a conversation in which heavy parallels are drawn between the treatment of mutants, especially in Rachel's home timeline, and that of the Jewish people under the Nazis. A sombre reminder that the X-Men have often been metaphors for social inequality. Some great art, spectacular storytelling, a bit of humour and some food for thought. That is Excalibur at its best. Issue 11. Hold on. Again? Now I'm getting concerned. It's Marshall Rogers again on this one, and it's a shame that Alan missed it, because this is the issue that kicks off the storyline that the title is probably, unfortunately, best known for. Because at the end of the issue, we see the Nazi Moira McTaggart lob a grenade at her Earth 616 counterpart. Phoenix tries to contain the explosion, but it triggers a strange reaction in Widget, which results in him, Excalibur, and the train they are on being launched through an interdimensional window and beginning, yes, the Crosstime Caper. For me, this is where the wheels begin to wobble. I know it's a popular storyline for a lot of people, if you can call it a storyline, but not for me. It's all just a bit too silly and aimless. There are one or two notable developments that happen. Cap gets a new outfit in issue 13, In-universe, this was because his uniform had been destroyed during Inferno, but the real reason for its replacement was that the colourists working on the book kept on getting the reds, whites and blues of the colour scheme the wrong way round. This new, simpler outfit, previously worn by another member of the Captain Britain Corps, was both easier to colour and draw. Meghan gets her own new outfit in the following issue, before Jamie Braddock gets an awesome makeover in issue 15. He is no longer the rogue race car driving playboy. Instead, he is an incredibly odd, mentally damaged, extremely powerful mutant, who just happens to walk around in his underpants. We get plenty of alternate Earths, other planets, the Technet, a battle with Jamie Braddock. But for me, it's essentially a series of one-and-done tales where, at the end of each one, we and the team are left wondering, I wonder where the train will take them next. Issue 12 promised us that this was part 1 of 9, but it actually ran to 12 parts, officially. The joy of a storyline where the characters can turn up at any place and any time means that the creators can continue having fun with it long after the official storyline had come to an end. In 2019, Chris Claremont wrote a short story featuring the team in pre-unified Germany. I say pre-unified, but only just, as it seems that the team, transported there by Widget and their train during the Crosstime Caper, were actually responsible for the fall of the Berlin Wall. A decade before that, and it was Davis making the most of the dimension hopping, as he had the team crashing into the midst of the Clandestine limited series that he both drew and wrote. If you haven't read any Clandestine comics, I recommend you check them out for some typical, considered Alan Davis writing. Back to the late 80s, and there was a bigger issue going on. Some of the Crosstime Caper issues were drawn by Davis, some, too many, were not. The truth is that Davis was struggling with his deadlines, and he felt that this was affecting the quality of his work. This was made even worse when Excalibur, like many Marvel comics at that time, started publishing fortnightly for the summer. This was too much for Davis, and after providing the art for the last 2 chapters of the Caper, he left the title. Worse was to come, because, I tell you what, let's get rid of all of these. 10 issues later, Chris Claremont also left the book. He had planned to stick around for the long term. There were numerous plot threads that he intended to return to in later issues, but he just wasn't enjoying working on the book anymore. He had a great working relationship with Alan Davis, one that he just couldn't replicate with Alan's replacements. So he decided to leave and focus his story writing skills on the soon-to-be-released new X-Men series. What followed wasn't good. A succession of writers, including prominent X-Men scribe Scott Lobdell, and artists did what they could with the book, but without its 2 creators, it really lost its way. Now, I know I'm an Alan Davis fanboy, but have you seen some of the art from this period? This is the work of Chris Wozniak. He did a few issues during this period. He even did the corner box. I mean, seriously? What about this abominable artwork? Mark Badger is the public enemy number 1 from whose HB these monstrosities flowed. Incredibly, one reader considered this the best Excalibur story ever. He even highlights the artwork as an asset. Surely even subjectivity has its limits. I prefer Tim Cook's assessment. There's a man who knows what he's talking about. But all of this disappointing output wasn't enough to undo the work that Claremont and Davis had already done. Excalibur, along with Captain Britain, were now a part of the Marvel firmament. There were guest appearances in a variety of other titles, from the likes of Quasar and She-Hulk, to A-listers such as Brian's old student pal, Spider-Man, and a 3-issue storyline in The Mighty Thor that featured not only the Enchantress and the Wrecking Crew, yawn, but also saw the team cross paths once more with the Juggernaut. It's a fun story, although their guest appearance is really overshadowed by an awesome battle between Jugs and the Thunder God. There you go. It seems appropriate to leave it on that homage to the special edition. In the summer of 1990, Marvel UK tried to reclaim their character, as Cap helped kick off the Knights of Pendragon series. Yes, he featured on a few of the covers, And yes, he even got his face in the corner box. But he really wasn't the focus of this series that mixed elements of superheroism with horror and British folklore. Sounds odd, but it's definitely worth checking out if you want something different from the usual Marvel fare. The team even got a good run out in the pages of the anthology comic Marvel Comics Presents, in a story that spanned 8 issues. Written by Michael Higgins, with art by Eric Larson, and covers by a variety of... Wait a minute. I recognise that... what would you call it? Style, I suppose. Who gave him that gig? Actually, this came out before he got the job in Excalibur. Someone in editorial obviously saw this cover and thought, yeah, let's stick this guy on the book that started out as a prestige format release. Excalibur had now been around for 3 years, but with less successful creative teams working on it, things were beginning to look shaky. If it stood any chance of surviving this seemingly terminal decline, it would require open heart surgery. Luckily, they had just the man for the job. A man who could not just draw, but also write. A man who held the character of Captain Britain close to his heart. A man called Alan Davis.